Evelyn Green had spent the past 5 years perfecting the art of quiet living. Nestled in the picturesque town of Brookhaven, her small flower shop, Bloom and Blossom, was a centerpiece of Main Street. Every bouquet she arranged carried her precise touch, each stem placed with care and artistry. To the townsfolk, Evelyn was the kind florist with a mysterious past she never spoke about, a comforting presence in a world that often felt too fast and too loud. Brookhaven was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where life moved at an unhurried pace. Evelyn liked it that way. She enjoyed the mornings when she unlocked the shop's doors, breathing in the floral scent that greeted her. She loved the regulars who stopped by for flowers, just because, and the young couples buying arrangements for first dates or apologies. Her favorite moments, however, were the quiet ones she spent with her 14-year-old niece, Sarah. After losing her parents in a car accident, Sarah had come to live with Evelyn. The girl had a knack for technology that baffled Evelyn but never failed to amuse her. Sarah often sat at the shop's counter, her laptop open, fingers flying over the keyboard as she tinkered with coding projects or researched topics far beyond her age. On this particular morning, Sarah looked up from her screen, her hazel eyes bright with curiosity. "Aunt Evie, why do you think people buy flowers when they're happy and sad?" she asked. Evelyn paused, holding a delicate rose in her hands. "Flowers speak when words fail. They say, 'I love you,' 'I'm sorry,' or even 'I'll miss you.' Sometimes, we need beauty to fill the gaps words can't reach." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, returning to her laptop. Evelyn smiled. It was moments like these that made her decision to leave her old life behind worth it. The peace of Brookhaven was something Evelyn had worked hard to protect, not just for herself, but for Sarah and the town she had grown to love. That peace was shattered one afternoon when the Iron Fong Syndicate rolled into town. They weren't subtle. Black motorcycles roared down Main Street, leather-clad men and women with grim faces and predatory eyes. Their leader, Victor Steele, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cruel smirk and an aura of quiet menace. The town's residents watched nervously as the gang members parked their bikes and began fanning out, entering businesses one by one. Evelyn stood behind the counter, her expression neutral, as two syndicate members entered her shop. One was a wiry man with a scar cutting across his cheek, while the other was burly, with tattoos running up his neck. "Nice place you've got here," Scar said, looking around. "Bet you'd like to keep it that way." Evelyn's hands didn't falter as she tied a ribbon around a bouquet of lilies. "I do my best to keep it welcoming," she replied evenly. Tattoo leaned on the counter, his grin unpleasant. "We're offering protection. For a small monthly fee, no one's gonna mess with your shop. You wouldn't want any accidents, would you?" Evelyn met his gaze, her expression calm. "I'll think about it." Scar leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Don't think too long. Accidents can happen quick." Evelyn's smile was polite but firm. "I'll take my chances. Now, unless you're here to buy flowers, I'd appreciate it if you left. I have customers to serve." Tattoo sneered but pulled Scar toward the door. "You've got 24 hours, he said over his shoulder. As soon as the door shut, Sarah emerged from the back room, her face pale. "Who were they?" "Trouble," Evelyn replied, her voice low. "The kind we're not going to ignore." That evening, Evelyn sat in the small apartment above the shop, sipping tea as she stared at the town's map spread across the table. Her past had taught her to recognize patterns, and the Iron Fong Syndicate wasn't just passing through. They were methodically targeting businesses, starting with the most vulnerable and working their way up. Sarah joined her, her laptop in hand. "I did some digging," she said. "That gang, they're involved in extortion, drug running, and arms deals. And they've got a reputation for making examples of people who don't cooperate." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "How deep did you dig?" "Deep enough to know they're bad news," Sarah said, "but not deep enough to leave breadcrumbs. I used proxies." Evelyn nodded. Sarah was learning quickly. "Do we call the police?" Sarah asked. "They're out of their depth," Evelyn said. "The Iron Fong has resources, connections. If we want to protect Brookhaven, we'll have to handle this ourselves." "We?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, we," Evelyn said, her voice firm, "but only if you follow my lead. No improvising. No taking risks. Understood? Sarah nodded, her fear giving way to determination. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the shop, her movements as calm and measured as always. She greeted her regulars with a smile, arranged bouquets with precision, and listened patiently as customers told her about their lives. But beneath the surface, her mind worked like a machine. She memorized the faces of syndicate members who passed by her shop, noting their movements and routines. She identified the businesses that had been approached and the ones that had already paid. By nightfall, Evelyn had built a profile of the Iron Fang's activities in Brookhaven. She knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and their patterns. As she stood by the window, watching the shadows deepen over Main Street, Evelyn felt the familiar stirrings of a fire she thought she had left behind. "They think we're weak," she said softly, almost to herself. "They don't realize they've picked the wrong town." In the corner, Sarah looked up from her laptop. "What's the plan, Aunt Evie?" Evelyn turned, her expression steely. "We're going to remind them that even flowers can have thorns." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Bloom and Blossom, casting a soft golden glow over the shop. Evelyn arranged a bouquet of daisies and sunflowers with steady hands, her mind far from the cheerful flowers in front of her. She glanced outside, where the Iron Fang Syndicate's motorcycles were parked in a loose line, their chrome gleaming under the light. The gang had chosen to set up shop in the old mechanic's garage at the edge of town. It had been abandoned for years, but now it buzzed with activity. Syndicate members came and went, their presence a dark stain on Brookhaven's otherwise serene streets. Evelyn kept her movements calm and practiced, but her mind was on high alert. Every detail mattered: the comings and goings, the vehicles used, and the patterns of the syndicate members. She noted it all. The bell above the shop's door jingled, pulling Evelyn from her thoughts. Victor Steele, the leader of the Iron Fang Syndicate, stepped inside, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. He was taller than Evelyn had expected, with a commanding presence and piercing gray eyes. He exuded confidence, the kind that came from years of getting what he wanted without resistance. Victor surveyed the shop, his gaze lingering on the delicate arrangements and handwritten signs. His smirk grew as he approached the counter where Evelyn stood. "Nice place you've got here," Victor said, his voice low and smooth. "Thank you," Evelyn replied, her tone polite but neutral. Victor leaned casually on the counter, his smirk never faltering. "I hear you've met some of my associates. If you're referring to the gentlemen who came by yesterday, they did stop in," Evelyn said. "But I'm afraid they left without buying anything." Victor chuckled, the sound sharp and humorless. "They weren't here to shop, Miss Green. They were here to offer you a deal." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, feigning confusion. "A deal?" "Protection," Victor said, his smile hardening. "Brookhaven is changing, and businesses like yours need to adapt. For a small fee, the Iron Fang can ensure nothing happens to this lovely little shop of yours." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her, her expression calm. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I'll need your protection." Victor's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He straightened, his tone turning icy. "That's disappointing. I don't think you understand how dangerous it can be to refuse." Before Evelyn could respond, Sarah appeared from the back room, a box of fresh supplies in her hands. She froze when she saw Victor, her wide eyes darting nervously to Evelyn. Victor's gaze shifted to Sarah, and his smirk returned. "You've got family here, huh? It'd be a shame if anything happened to this place, or the people in it." Evelyn's grip tightened on the counter, but her voice remained steady. "You've made your point. Now, I'd appreciate it if you left." Victor stared at her for a long moment, then turned to leave. At the door, he glanced back over his shoulder. "You've got 24 hours to reconsider. After that, we won't be so polite." The bell jingled as he walked out, and Evelyn exhaled slowly. That night, Evelyn sat in her dimly lit apartment, a notebook spread out on the kitchen table. She sketched out patterns of the syndicate's movements, noting their targets and tactics. Sarah sat across from her, her laptop open, lines of code scrolling across the screen. "They're bad news, Aunt Evie," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "I found a ton of reports about them. Extortion, drug trafficking, weapons deals. They've done this in other towns. and it never ends well for anyone who resists. They've made their move, Evelyn said, tapping her pen against the notebook. Now it's our turn. Sarah frowned. But what can we do? It's not like we can fight them. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp. We don't fight them head-on. We outthink them. Sarah hesitated, then asked, What are you planning? Evelyn met her niece's gaze, her voice calm but firm. We're going to show them they picked the wrong town. The next day, Evelyn began planting the seeds of her plan. She made her usual deliveries to other businesses in town, subtly gauging their willingness to resist the syndicate. Many of them were afraid, their fear evident in their nervous glances and hushed voices. At the diner, Evelyn sat with Nora, her closest friend and the owner of the bakery next door. Nora was one of the few who wasn't intimidated. They came by yesterday, Nora said, her voice low. Tried to scare me into paying. I told them to shove it. They'll be back, Evelyn said. Nora raised an eyebrow. You've got that look, Evie. What are you planning? Nothing yet, Evelyn replied. But when the time comes, I'll need your help. Nora grinned. You've got it. Just tell me when. By evening, Evelyn had a clearer picture of the syndicate's operations. She knew Victor was methodical, using fear to control and isolate his targets. The gang's strength lay in their numbers and their ability to intimidate. Evelyn's strength lay in her ability to see weaknesses. As she stood at her workbench, trimming stems and arranging flowers, Sarah approached with her laptop. I hacked into their communication channels, Sarah said, her voice hushed. They're talking about expanding their operation. Victor wants to turn Brookhaven into a hub for their business. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then we stop them here. How? Sarah asked. Evelyn turned to face her niece, her expression serious. By making them overreach. We let them think they're in control. We let them grow comfortable. And when the time is right, we take everything away from them. Sarah's eyes widened. That's risky. It's necessary, Evelyn said. The deadline came and went, and Victor's gang returned, demanding payment. Evelyn refused again, her calm demeanor hiding the fire burning inside her. Later that night, the flower shop's front window was shattered, and a spray-painted warning marred the wall, pay or else. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood in the shattered glass, her gaze steely. They're escalating, she said to Sarah. Good. It means they're playing right into our hands. By the end of the chapter, Evelyn had set her plan in motion. She wasn't just protecting her flower shop. She was preparing to dismantle the Iron Fang syndicate from the inside out. The gang thought they were in control, but they had no idea they were walking into a carefully laid trap, one petal at a time. Brookhaven might have seemed like an easy target, but Victor Steele was about to learn that even the quietest towns could fight back, and that Evelyn Green was far more than she appeared. Evelyn Green woke before dawn, a habit that years of military discipline had etched into her bones. The morning light filtered into the flower shop, casting long shadows across the counter. The shattered glass from the previous night had been swept away, but the damage still lingered like an unspoken warning. She moved through the shop methodically, checking the locks, realigning the flowers in the cooler, and ensuring the surveillance cameras she'd installed remained operational. On the surface, she was preparing for another day of business. In truth, she was readying for war. Sarah's voice broke the silence as she descended the stairs from their shared apartment above the shop. Morning, Aunt Evie. Evelyn glanced at her niece, noting the determined set of Sarah's jaw. Good morning. You sleep okay? Not really, Sarah admitted, setting her laptop on the counter. I couldn't stop thinking about what they might do next. Evelyn nodded, her expression softening. Fear is natural, but it's not productive. We channel it into preparation. Sarah hesitated, then gestured toward her laptop. I've been working on something. I think you should see it. Evelyn arched an eyebrow as Sarah opened several files. Lines of code, intercepted messages, and maps filled the screen. I hacked into their network, Sarah said, a hint of pride in her voice. They're using an encrypted system, but it's not as secure as they think. I've been tracking their movements. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. You've got a gift, Sarah. This is good work. Sarah's face brightened at the praise, but it quickly darkened. There's more. They've been making calls to a warehouse outside of town. It looks like they're bringing in more supplies, guns, maybe drugs. Whatever it is, it's big. Evelyn's smile faded. That means they're escalating. They think they can solidify their hold here before anyone stops them. What do we do? Sarah asked. Evelyn closed the laptop. We use their confidence against them. But first, I need to show you something. Evelyn led Sarah to the basement of the flower shop. The space was small and unassuming, with shelves lined with extra pots, fertilizers, and floral foam. Evelyn walked to the far wall, her fingers brushing a seemingly ordinary brick. She pressed it, and with a soft click, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a steel door with a keypad. Sarah's jaw dropped. Is this what I think it is? Evelyn entered a code, and the door swung open, revealing a hidden room. The walls were lined with neatly organized weapons, surveillance equipment, and stacks of documents. A large table in the center held maps of Brookhaven, marked with precise annotations. This is where I keep my tools, Evelyn said, her voice steady. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the arsenal. You've been ready for something like this? I've been ready for the possibility, Evelyn corrected. I hoped I'd never have to use this again. But the world doesn't always give us what we want. She pointed to a drawer filled with small devices. Surveillance bugs. We're going to place these around their base and on their vehicles. The more information we have, the better. Sarah nodded, still processing the revelation. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Because I wanted to protect you from it, Evelyn said. But now you're part of this, whether we like it or not. Sarah's gaze hardened. I want to help. I'm not just a kid, Aunt Evie. Evelyn placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. I know. And that's why I need you to promise me something. No risks. You're smart, but this is dangerous. If anything happens to you, her voice faltered for the briefest moment, I won't let anything happen to you. Sarah nodded solemnly. Later that day, Evelyn paid a visit to Nora's bakery. Nora greeted her with a flower-covered apron and a sharp grin. What's the plan, Evie? Evelyn leaned closer, lowering her voice. We need to place surveillance devices at their base. Can you create a distraction? Nora's eyes twinkled mischievously. Leave it to me. I've been itching to rattle those guys. That night, while the Iron Fong Syndicate gathered in their garage headquarters, Nora staged her distraction. She parked her delivery van near their base, pretending to have engine trouble. As the gang members came out to investigate, Evelyn slipped into the shadows, placing bugs on their motorcycles and in the corners of the building. By the time Nora loudly declared her van fixed and drove away, Evelyn had gathered more intelligence than the syndicate realized. Back at the shop, Evelyn and Sarah pored over the data the bugs transmitted. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, decrypting audio and tracking locations. They're moving something to the warehouse tomorrow night, Sarah said, her voice tense. I think it's their first major shipment. Evelyn leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the map. Then we make sure it doesn't get there. How? We intercept it, Evelyn said simply. As the chapter closes, Evelyn begins preparing for the next phase of her plan. The flower shop, once a place of calm and beauty, has become a hub of strategy and resistance. Sarah, now fully involved, begins to see her aunt in a new light, not just as a guardian, but as a protector of justice. The Iron Fong Syndicate believes they are unstoppable, but they have no idea how much Evelyn Green knows about the art of dismantling threats. The following evening, the streets of Brookhaven were unusually quiet. The Iron Fong Syndicate had become a shadow over the town, their presence growing heavier with each passing day. But Evelyn Green wasn't about to let them solidify their power. At the flower shop, Evelyn and Sarah finalized their plan. The warehouse outside of town was their target, and Evelyn had a clear strategy. Sabotage the shipment without being detected. Nora arrived, her usual energy laced with determination. I'm ready, she said. Just tell me what to do. You're my distraction again, Evelyn replied. But this time, we need something louder. Consider it done, Nora said, grinning. Under the cover of darkness, Evelyn drove her old truck to the warehouse's outskirts. Sarah, connected via an encrypted comms link, guided her through the warehouse's security cameras. The guards are rotating every 15 minutes, Sarah said. You've got a window. Evelyn moved with practiced precision, slipping past the guards and into the shadows of the warehouse. She placed small explosive charges on the tires of the trucks carrying the shipment, enough to disable them but not cause harm. Meanwhile, Nora created a commotion outside. Her van parked across the road with its hazard lights blinking. The guards were too distracted by her exaggerated attempts to fix her broken van to notice Evelyn slipping out. As Evelyn returned to the truck, Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. "They're moving. Get clear." Moments later, the charges detonated with muffled pops, leaving the trucks immobilized. Evelyn watched from a distance as the syndicate scrambled, their plans disrupted. The next morning, news of the sabotage spread through Brookhaven. The syndicate's frustration was palpable, and Victor Steele's temper flared. Evelyn, however, remained calm. She returned to her shop, arranging flowers and serving customers as if nothing had happened. But beneath her calm exterior, she was already planning her next move. The chapter ends with the syndicate realizing they're facing an opponent who knows their every move. Victor begins to suspect someone in the town is working against him, but he has no idea how far Evelyn is willing to go to protect Brookhaven. Evelyn's quiet defiance has become an active resistance, and the stakes are rising. The atmosphere in Brookhaven grew heavier as news of the sabotaged shipment spread through the town. The Iron Fang Syndicate was on edge, their frustration visible in the way they moved through the streets. They rode their motorcycles in loud, aggressive packs, glaring at anyone who dared to meet their gaze. It was clear to Evelyn that Victor Steele was losing his patience. In her flower shop, Evelyn remained composed. She rearranged the display of lilies and hydrangeas by the window, her sharp eyes occasionally flicking to the street outside. Every time a group of bikers passed, she made a mental note of their numbers, demeanor, and interactions with the townsfolk. Sarah sat at the counter, her laptop humming softly. The shop was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the keys. "They're furious," Sarah said, her voice low. "Intercepted a message from Victor to his crew. He's demanding answers." Evelyn nodded. "Good. Angry people make mistakes." Sarah hesitated. "But what if they figure out it's US?" "They won't," Evelyn said firmly. "Not if we stay ahead of them. What else have you found?" Sarah turned the laptop to face Evelyn, revealing a map with several marked locations. "They're regrouping. Looks like they've set up checkpoints around town, trying to control the roads in and out. And they've increased their presence at the garage. Victor's consolidating his forces." Evelyn studied the map, her mind racing. He's trying to show strength, but this level of control will spread him thin. We can use that. How? Sarah asked. By hitting where he doesn't expect. That evening, Evelyn gathered her small team. Sarah, Nora, and Mike, the owner of the hardware store. Mike was a grizzled man with a no-nonsense attitude, and he had a personal stake in the fight. The syndicate had targeted his store with vandalism, breaking windows and scaring off customers. "I'm in," Mike said, his voice gruff. "I've had enough of these bastards thinking they own this town." Evelyn laid out her plan on the table, her voice calm but commanding. "They've set up checkpoints to intimidate the town and isolate us. We're going to dismantle them one by one. How do we do that without drawing attention?" Nora asked. "Precision," Evelyn replied. "We use their tactics against them. Quick strikes, no lingering, and no direct confrontation." She turned to Sarah. "You'll monitor their communications and alert us if anything changes." Sarah nodded, her eyes determined. Evelyn continued, "Mike, I'll need your tools and supplies. Nora, you're the lookout. I'll handle the execution." The first target was a checkpoint near the bridge at the town's edge. Evelyn parked her truck a safe distance away, concealed by the trees lining the road. Through her binoculars, she observed two syndicate members lounging by their motorcycles, rifles slung over their shoulders. "Only 2 guards," Evelyn murmured into her earpiece. Sarah's voice crackled softly in response. "Confirmed. No reinforcements nearby." Evelyn moved swiftly and silently, her black clothing blending into the shadows. She placed small smoke bombs and noise generators in the area around the checkpoint. When everything was set, she retreated to the truck and waited. "Triggering now," Sarah whispered. The smoke bombs erupted, and the air filled with dense clouds. The guards shouted in confusion, their silhouettes barely visible through the haze. The noise generators added to the chaos, emitting high-pitched shrieks that disoriented the bikers. Evelyn struck quickly, slashing the tires of their motorcycles and cutting the wires to their radios before disappearing into the woods. By the time the smoke cleared, the guards were left stranded, their vehicles useless and their communications severed. Over the next 2 nights, Evelyn and her team repeated the process at other checkpoints, using a combination of misdirection and sabotage to dismantle the syndicate's presence. Mike proved invaluable, providing tools and materials that allowed Evelyn to work with precision. Nora's sharp eyes and quick thinking ensured they were never caught off guard. And Sarah's tech skills kept them one step ahead, intercepting messages and tracking syndicate movements. Victor's frustration grew with every setback. He doubled the patrols, stationed more guards at key points, and sent scouts to search for the culprits. But Evelyn's team was careful, striking only when the odds were in their favor. One night, as Evelyn prepared for another mission, Sarah approached her with a worried expression. "Aunt Evie, I found something." Evelyn set down her tools and turned to her niece. "What is it?" Sarah showed her a message intercepted from Victor's encrypted channels. "They're planning to hit the school. They think someone there might be helping us." Evelyn's blood ran cold. The thought of the syndicate targeting children was intolerable. "When?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Tomorrow morning," Sarah replied. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We can't let that happen." The next morning, Evelyn was already in position near the school, her surveillance equipment set up to monitor the area. She had notified the sheriff, a good man who had been quietly supportive but hesitant to confront the syndicate directly. Together, they arranged for a subtle increase in law enforcement presence near the school. As predicted, a group of syndicate members arrived on motorcycles, their menacing presence meant to intimidate. But they were met with a surprise. Local police officers stationed at key points, watching their every move. Evelyn stayed hidden, her eyes on the bikers. She'd planted additional surveillance devices on their motorcycles, ensuring she could track them even after they left. The syndicate members lingered for a while, clearly frustrated by the police presence, before finally retreating. Back at the flower shop, Evelyn reviewed the footage and data collected during the encounter. "This confirms their tactics," she said to Sarah. "They rely on fear and intimidation. When that doesn't work, they're at a loss." "But what about Victor?" Sarah asked. "He's not going to back down." "No," Evelyn agreed. "But he's starting to make mistakes. And mistakes are how we'll take him down." By the end of the chapter, Victor Steele's Iron Fang Syndicate was reeling from a series of calculated strikes that left them weakened and disoriented. Evelyn's actions had not only disrupted their operations, but also planted the seeds of doubt and fear within their ranks. However, Evelyn knew the fight was far from over. Victor was a dangerous man, and he wouldn't take these losses lightly. As she prepared for the next phase of her plan, Evelyn steeled herself for the inevitable retaliation. Brookhaven was no longer just a town under siege. It was a battlefield, and Evelyn Green was determined to protect it at all costs. The Iron Fang Syndicate's anger reverberated through Brookhaven like a storm on the horizon. Their recent failures to maintain control had wounded their pride, and Victor Steele's frustration was palpable. Evelyn Green knew the syndicate wouldn't let these disruptions go unanswered. The retaliation was inevitable. Evelyn spent the morning reinforcing the shop. Sarah helped install new layers of security, reinforced locks, hidden cameras, and motion detectors. Every entry point was fortified, every potential vulnerability anticipated. Nora stopped by mid-morning, a tray of pastries in hand. "You've got that look, Evie," she said, setting the tray on the counter. "What look?" Evelyn asked without looking up from the surveillance feed she was studying. "The one you used to get before something big went down," Nora replied, crossing her arms. "You think they're coming for you?" "They're not just coming for me," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "They're coming for all of us." Nora nodded grimly. "Well, they're not getting far. Not while we're here." Later that evening, Evelyn stood in her living room, watching as Sarah worked on her laptop. "They're regrouping," Sarah said, her tone heavy with concern. "I intercepted a message from Victor. He's planning something big." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Details?" "Not many yet," Sarah admitted, "but they're mobilizing." Whatever it is, it's happening tonight. Evelyn stepped away, her mind racing. She had expected retaliation, but Victor's escalation came faster than she'd anticipated. She needed to act now. Nora and Mike, Evelyn said suddenly. I need them here. Sarah nodded and reached for her phone. Within the hour, Nora and Mike arrived at the flower shop. Evelyn gathered them in the back room, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. They're planning something, Evelyn began. We don't know the full scope yet, but they're mobilizing. What do you need from us? Mike asked, his expression resolute. I need eyes and ears across town, Evelyn said. If they're making moves, I want to know exactly where and when. Nora grinned. You got it. Evelyn continued, her tone firm. But be careful. If you see anything suspicious, report it and get out. No risks. They both nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Evelyn arrived at the diner to find the Iron Fong Syndicate in full force. A group of bikers surrounded the building, revving their engines and shouting threats. The neon sign flickered overhead, casting eerie light on the scene. Evelyn stayed hidden, observing from the shadows. She noted their numbers and positions, her mind already formulating a plan. The syndicate wanted to send a message, but Evelyn wasn't about to let them intimidate her town. She spotted Victor among the group, his commanding presence unmistakable. He barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Make sure they know we're not playing games anymore. Evelyn's calm demeanor hardened into resolve. This was the opening she needed. As the bikers began vandalizing the diner, Evelyn acted. She threw a smoke bomb into their midst, the thick gray cloud enveloping them instantly. The bikers shouted in confusion, their movements chaotic. From her concealed position, Evelyn used a slingshot to launch noise devices onto their bikes. The high-pitched screeches sent the gang into further disarray. Victor's voice rose above the commotion. Find whoever's doing this. Evelyn remained hidden, methodically sabotaging their bikes. She disabled engines and cut fuel lines with practiced efficiency. By the time the smoke cleared, half their motorcycles were out of commission. The bikers' fury boiled over as they realized what had happened. Victor's cold gaze swept the area, his jaw tight with anger. We're being watched, he growled. Regroup and fall back. Now. Evelyn returned to the flower shop, her heart still pounding. Sarah met her at the door, relief washing over her face. They retreated, Sarah said, monitoring the feeds. For now, Evelyn replied, but they'll come back. The next morning, Brookhaven was on edge. The diner's owner, a kindly man named Frank, thanked Evelyn for her help, though he didn't know the full extent of her involvement. They're getting bolder, Frank said, shaking his head. This town's never seen anything like this. And it won't again, Evelyn assured him. Later, Sarah intercepted another message from Victor. This one was more ominous. They've figured out someone's targeting them directly, she said, her voice trembling. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Do they know it's us? Not yet, Sarah said, but they're close. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then we have to escalate before they do. The chapter ends with Victor Steele issuing an ultimatum through a town-wide broadcast on a hacked radio frequency. Whoever's responsible for this better step forward, or everyone in Brookhaven pays the price. Evelyn listens in silence, her resolve hardening. She knows the fight is far from over, and she's ready for the next move. The hacked broadcast echoed through Brookhaven like a clap of thunder. Victor Steele's voice carried an unmistakable menace, his words a chilling ultimatum. To the ghost haunting my operations, step forward. You have 24 hours. If you don't, this town will burn, and the people will understand the cost of defiance. The air in Evelyn Green's flower shop felt heavier than usual. Sarah stared at the radio in stunned silence, her fingers frozen mid-typing on her laptop. Nora, pacing near the window, muttered, "The guy's gone full lunatic." Evelyn leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. This was always going to happen. He wants fear. That's how he maintains control. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We make him regret this, Evelyn replied, her voice calm but firm. As Brookhaven woke to the chilling broadcast, the Iron Fong Syndicate escalated their efforts to isolate the town. Bikes patrolled the streets, their engines loud and menacing. Checkpoints sprang up at key intersections, manned by grim-faced bikers with rifles slung across their backs. The townsfolk retreated indoors, closing their blinds and locking their doors. Fear rippled through the community like an unspoken contagion. Evelyn, however, moved with purpose. In the backroom of her shop, she laid out a map of Brookhaven, marking the syndicate's known positions. Sarah worked beside her, intercepting messages and tracking movements. Nora and Mike joined them, both visibly shaken but determined. "They've tightened their grip," Mike said, pointing to the map. "They've got eyes on every major road and junction." Evelyn nodded. "They want to scare us into submission, but they're stretched thin. Their checkpoints and patrols are vulnerabilities. We're going to exploit them." That night, Evelyn's team went to work. Using Sarah's intercepted data, they mapped the syndicate's patrol routes and planned targeted strikes. Nora served as the decoy, drawing attention to one side of town while Evelyn and Mike dismantled the syndicate's operations on the other. At one checkpoint, Evelyn and Mike worked in tandem. Mike disabled the bikers' radios while Evelyn placed small, precise charges on their fuel tanks. The resulting chaos left the patrol stranded, their bikes rendered useless. In another part of town, Nora led a high-speed chase through the quiet streets, luring a group of bikers away from their post. She knew every shortcut and alley in Brookhaven, eventually losing them and returning to base unscathed. By the time the night was over, 3 of the syndicate's checkpoints had been neutralized, and their patrols were left disorganized and confused. Back at the shop, Sarah monitored the aftermath through surveillance feeds. "Victor's furious," she reported. "He's calling his men back to regroup." "Good," Evelyn said. "We need him desperate. Desperation leads to mistakes." The next morning, Evelyn visited the sheriff. Sheriff Colt Branson had been a quiet supporter of Evelyn's efforts, though he was bound by his badge to act within the law. "You've been busy," Colt said, leaning back in his chair. "Too busy for comfort," Evelyn replied. "But it's working. Victor's losing control." Colt sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know he's going to escalate. The guy's a cornered wolf. That makes him unpredictable." "Which is why we need to be ready," Evelyn said. "I've got enough evidence to bring in state and federal help, but we need to hold him off until they arrive." Colt nodded reluctantly. "I'll do what I can. Just promise me one thing. Don't get yourself killed." Evelyn's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "I'll do my best." By mid-afternoon, Victor struck back. His men began targeting businesses known to support Evelyn's efforts. The hardware store was vandalized, its windows shattered, and its shelves ransacked. The diner was defaced with graffiti, a warning to those who resisted the syndicate's rule. The town was on edge, but Evelyn remained composed. She met with her team in the flower shop, her calm demeanor a steadying force. "They're trying to break us," Evelyn said, "but they're showing their hand. The more reckless they become, the easier they are to predict." "What's the plan?" Mike asked, his fists clenched. "We keep pushing," Evelyn replied. "We don't let them intimidate us. Victor's trying to buy time, but every move he makes is giving us more evidence." That evening, Evelyn decided to confront Victor directly. Using Sarah's intercepted data, she identified a warehouse where Victor was likely holding a meeting with his inner circle. "You can't go alone," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "I won't be alone," Evelyn replied. "You'll guide me. Nora will run recon, and Mike will be ready to extract me if things go south." The plan was risky, but Evelyn knew it was the best chance to gather critical intelligence and to show Victor he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. The warehouse was on the outskirts of town, a hulking structure surrounded by chain-link fencing. Evelyn approached under the cover of darkness, her black clothing blending into the shadows. Sarah's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. 2 guards at the front, one patrolling the perimeter. "Victor's inside, 2nd floor." "Got it," Evelyn whispered. She slipped past the outer guards, using the cover of a passing train to mask her movements. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and cigarette smoke. From her concealed position, Evelyn observed Victor and his men gathered around a table, their voices low but heated. "We need to end this now," Victor growled, slamming his fist on the table. Find whoever's behind this and make an example of them. One of his lieutenants hesitated. But the town's watching. If we push too hard, then we push harder. Victor snapped. Fear is the only language these people understand. Evelyn recorded every word, her small camera capturing the scene. It was the final piece of evidence she needed. As Evelyn retreated, her foot brushed against a loose piece of metal, the faint sound enough to alert the guards. "She's here," one of them shouted. Evelyn sprinted toward the exit, her movements swift and calculated. Nora, positioned outside, created a diversion with a flare gun, drawing the guards away. Evelyn slipped through the fence and into the waiting truck where Mike was ready to drive. They sped off into the night, leaving the syndicate scrambling in confusion. Back at the flower shop, Evelyn reviewed the footage with Sarah and Nora. "This is it," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "This is what we need to take them down." Sarah nodded, her determination shining through. "I'll send it to the state and federal agencies. They'll have no choice but to act now." As the chapter ends, Victor realizes that his ultimatum has backfired. The town hasn't cowered in fear. It's risen to fight back. And Evelyn Green is leading the charge. The following morning, the weight of Victor Steele's escalating desperation hung heavy over Brookhaven. The Iron Fang Syndicate's presence was stronger than ever, but their cohesion was cracking. They were no longer an invincible force, but a wounded predator striking out in fear and fury. Evelyn Green stood in her flower shop, the hum of Sarah's laptop and the low chatter from the police scanner filling the room. The latest surveillance footage from the warehouse played on a small screen, showing Victor's explosive tirade and his men's growing unease. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her face pale but determined. "The feds responded to our transmission. They're coordinating with state law enforcement to move in on Victor, but they need time to get resources in place." Evelyn nodded, her expression calm despite the storm brewing around them. "Then we give them the time they need. We keep the syndicate off balance and make sure they don't consolidate." Mike leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "They're targeting more businesses. Walt's parts store got hit last night. They smashed his inventory, cut his power, the whole deal." Nora chimed in, her voice tight with frustration. "They're trying to scare the town into submission. But people are starting to talk. They're fed up, Evie. We have to do something." Evelyn's gaze swept the room, her calm presence anchoring the group. "We've already done more than they realize. The syndicate's unraveling. Victor knows it, and that makes him dangerous. But it also makes him predictable. We'll stay the course." That afternoon, Sarah intercepted a critical piece of intelligence. Victor was planning a large-scale show of force, an organized raid on the police station to seize evidence and send a clear message to Brookhaven. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice trembling with urgency. "They're planning to hit the station tonight. If they pull this off, they'll bury the evidence we've collected and crush any hope of outside intervention." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Then we won't let them succeed." Evelyn spent the rest of the day devising a plan. She contacted Sheriff Colt Branson and laid out the situation. While hesitant at first, Colt agreed to work with Evelyn's team to defend the station. "We'll fortify the building," Colt said over the phone. "My deputies and I will hold them off as long as we can. But we're going to need backup." "You'll have it," Evelyn assured him. As night fell, Evelyn's team moved into position. Sarah stayed at the flower shop, monitoring communications and coordinating efforts. Nora and Mike joined Evelyn at the police station, helping Colt and his deputies prepare for the impending raid. Inside the station, Colt issued instructions to his officers, his calm demeanor hiding the tension beneath. "We hold the line," he said. "No matter what happens, we can't let them breach this building." Evelyn worked alongside the deputies, securing doors, reinforcing windows, and setting up barriers. "They'll come hard and fast," she warned. "But speed makes them sloppy. We can use that." Outside, Nora climbed onto the station's roof, her sharp eyes scanning the streets below. She carried a high-powered flashlight and a flare gun, ready to signal if she spotted the syndicate's approach. Shortly before midnight, the roar of motorcycles shattered the quiet. Nora's voice crackled through the radio. "They're coming. At least a dozen bikes, heavily armed. Looks like they've got backup trucks too." Inside the station, everyone tensed. Colt checked his weapon, his expression grim. Here we go. The first wave of bikers arrived, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They encircled the station, engines growling like wolves preparing to attack. Victor's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Sheriff Branson, you've been holding on to something that doesn't belong to you. Hand over the evidence, and we'll leave your little station in one piece. Colt stepped to the front window, his voice steady as he responded. This is Brookhaven, Steele. You don't make the rules here. Turn around and leave before you make this worse for yourself. Victor's laughter echoed across the street. You think this is bad, Sheriff? You haven't seen anything yet. The bikers began their assault, firing at the station's reinforced windows and attempting to ram the barricaded doors with their trucks. Inside, Evelyn and the deputies maintained their positions, returning fire only when necessary. Evelyn's voice carried calm authority as she directed the defense. Stay low. Conserve ammunition. They're testing us. Don't give them anything they can use. On the roof, Nora used her flashlight to disorient the bikers, shining it into their eyes as they tried to breach the perimeter. Her flare gun sent bursts of light into the night sky, signaling their location to potential reinforcements. Meanwhile, Sarah worked tirelessly from the flower shop, intercepting the syndicate's communications and relaying critical information to Evelyn. They're trying to flank you, Sarah warned. Two groups splitting off, one heading for the back entrance. Evelyn adjusted their defenses, repositioning deputies to counter the flanking maneuver. Good catch, Sarah. Keep it coming. The battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing through the streets. The syndicate's attacks grew more desperate as their initial assault failed to break the station's defenses. Victor, furious at the resistance, ordered his men to escalate. Bring in the big guns. We'll tear that place apart brick by brick if we have to. But Evelyn had anticipated this move. She'd planted road spikes and improvised traps along the syndicate's approach routes. As their reinforcements attempted to join the fight, they were met with a series of well-placed obstacles that slowed their progress and left them vulnerable. As the night wore on, the tide began to turn. The syndicate's forces were exhausted and disorganized, their confidence shaken by the town's unexpected resistance. Evelyn seized the moment, rallying the deputies for a counteroffensive. Now's our chance, she said. We push them back. Show them this town isn't theirs to take. Under her leadership, the defenders launched a coordinated effort to drive the bikers away from the station. Evelyn's tactical precision and the deputies' determination proved too much for the syndicate to overcome. By dawn, the battle was over. The syndicate's forces had retreated, leaving behind damaged vehicles and scattered weapons. The police station stood intact, a testament to Brookhaven's resilience. Evelyn and her team emerged, battered but victorious. Colt approached her, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. I don't know how you do it, Evelyn, but I'm glad you're on our side. Evelyn gave a small smile. We're not done yet, Sheriff. Victor's still out there, and he's not going to stop. But now, he knows we won't either. As the sun rose over Brookhaven, the townsfolk emerged from their homes, emboldened by the station's defense. Word of the victory spread quickly, and the people began to rally around Evelyn and her team. Back at the flower shop, Evelyn and Sarah reviewed the night's footage, sending the final evidence package to state and federal authorities. They'll move now, Evelyn said confidently. Victor's crossed too many lines. It's only a matter of time. Sarah looked at her aunt, her admiration evident. You were amazing out there. Evelyn placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. So were you. We did this together, and we'll finish it together. As the chapter ends, Victor Steele, nursing his wounded pride, retreats to plan his next move. But he knows his time is running out. Brookhaven has become more than a small town. It's a symbol of defiance, and Evelyn Green is its beating heart. Brookhaven stood on the edge of transformation. The townsfolk, no longer paralyzed by fear, began to organize. They reinforced their homes, supported their neighbors, and kept a watchful eye on every unfamiliar face. The Iron Fang Syndicate was no longer an invisible force looming over them. It was a known enemy on the verge of collapse. Evelyn Green watched this shift from her flower shop, her resolve stronger than ever. On her desk lay the latest message from federal authorities. Their task force was en route. The evidence she and Sarah had painstakingly collected had convinced them to act, and now it was only a matter of time. "They're coming, Evie," Sarah said, her voice filled with both relief and tension. "We just have to hold out a little longer." Evelyn nodded. A little longer is all we need. But she knew Victor Steele wouldn't wait idly for his downfall. He'd make one last desperate move, and she had to be ready. That evening, Victor gathered his remaining forces at an abandoned industrial yard on the outskirts of town. He paced in front of his men, his eyes blazing with anger and desperation. "This town has humiliated us," he growled, his voice echoing off the rusted walls. "Our reputation is in ruins because of a florist and her ragtag team. But we're not done. We're going to remind them who we are. Tonight, we take back control." One of his lieutenants hesitated. "Boss, the feds are circling. If we push too hard—" "They're not here yet," Victor snapped. "And by the time they arrive, Brookhaven will be ashes. We hit everything. The diner, the hardware store, the police station, her shop. No one's safe. We'll make them wish they'd never stood against us." The syndicate cheered, though the unease among them was palpable. Evelyn's surveillance network picked up the activity. Sarah, glued to her laptop, intercepted Victor's communications and confirmed his intentions. "He's planning a full-scale assault," Sarah reported, her face pale. "Multiple targets across town, all at once." Evelyn's mind raced. Victor was throwing everything he had into this attack, knowing it was his last chance to regain control. "We can't let him do this," Evelyn said firmly. "If we hold them off tonight, it's over for them. But we need a plan." Evelyn called a meeting at the flower shop. Sheriff Colt Branson, Nora, Mike, and a handful of trusted townsfolk gathered to hear her strategy. "They're hitting multiple locations," Evelyn began, pointing to a map of Brookhaven. "The diner, the hardware store, the police station, and here. They're trying to overwhelm us. How do we stop them all?" Colt asked, his brow furrowed. "We divide and conquer," Evelyn replied. "Colt, you and your deputies hold the police station. It's their primary target. They want the evidence we have." Colt nodded. "Understood. Nora, Mike, and I will split up to cover the other locations," Evelyn continued. "Sarah, you'll coordinate from here. Monitor their movements and keep us updated." "What about you?" Nora asked. Evelyn's gaze hardened. "I'll stay here. This shop is Victor's real target. If he's coming, I'll be ready for him." As night fell, the townsfolk prepared for battle. Evelyn fortified the flower shop, setting up hidden defenses and positioning cameras for maximum coverage. She double-checked the traps she'd set, ensuring they were ready to spring when the time came. Sarah worked tirelessly at her laptop, tracking the syndicate's movements and relaying information to the team. "They're mobilizing," she said. 3 groups heading toward their targets. Victor's group is the largest. They're coming here." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You've done more than enough, Sarah. Stay safe and keep us informed. I'll handle the rest." The first attacks began around midnight. At the diner, Nora used her sharp instincts and quick thinking to outmaneuver the bikers. She lured them into an alley where she had set traps, immobilizing their bikes and forcing them to retreat. At the hardware store, Mike and a few townsfolk stood their ground. Using barricades and improvised defenses, they fended off the syndicate's assault, their determination stronger than the gang's intimidation tactics. At the police station, Colt and his deputies repelled wave after wave of bikers, their training and resolve holding firm against the onslaught. Meanwhile, at the flower shop, Evelyn faced Victor's elite crew. The roar of motorcycles announced their arrival, followed by the crash of shattered glass as they stormed the shop. Evelyn moved with precision, using her knowledge of the layout and her carefully set traps to neutralize the intruders. A tripwire triggered a cascade of smoke bombs, disorienting the bikers and forcing them into vulnerable positions. Victor entered the shop last, his towering figure a menacing silhouette in the chaos. His voice cut through the noise. "You've caused me more trouble than anyone, Evelyn Green. But this ends tonight." Evelyn stepped out from behind the counter, her eyes locked on Victor. "You made the mistake of thinking you could own this town. That ends tonight." The confrontation between Evelyn and Victor was intense. He charged at her, his brute strength clashing with her agility and tactical precision. Evelyn used every advantage the shop offered, turning shelves and displays into obstacles that slowed Victor's movements. When he finally cornered her, she triggered her last trap, a net that dropped from the ceiling, entangling Victor and rendering him powerless. "You're done, Victor," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "This town isn't yours. It never was." As dawn broke over Brookhaven, the Syndicate's forces were in disarray. At every location, they had been repelled, their assaults thwarted by the town's united resistance. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as state and federal law enforcement arrived in force. They swept through the town, arresting Syndicate members and securing evidence. Victor Steele, still ensnared in Evelyn's trap, was taken into custody. His defiance was gone, replaced by the hollow realization that his reign was over. Evelyn stood outside her shop, watching as the last of the Syndicate was loaded into police vehicles. Colt approached her, a weary but triumphant smile on his face. "You did it, Evelyn," Colt said. "You held the line." "We all did," Evelyn replied. "This town stood together. That's why we won." As the chapter ends, the people of Brookhaven emerge from their homes, their fear replaced with hope. They gather around Evelyn, offering their gratitude and support. For the first time in months, Brookhaven feels like home again, a place of safety, strength, and community. But Evelyn knows her fight isn't over. As the federal agents begin their investigation, she prepares for the final chapter of this battle, ensuring justice is served and Brookhaven's hard-won peace endures. The morning sun bathed Brookhaven in a golden light, as if the town itself was exhaling a collective sigh of relief. The Iron Fang Syndicate's reign of terror had ended, and Victor Steele, their ruthless leader, sat in the back of a heavily guarded police van, his face a mask of defeat. Evelyn Green stood outside her flower shop, watching as state and federal law enforcement swarmed the town. The air buzzed with the hum of communication radios, the clatter of handcuffs, and the quiet conversations of agents piecing together the remnants of the Syndicate's operations. Beside her, Sarah worked on her laptop, transferring the last batch of evidence to federal agents. "That's everything," Sarah said, closing her laptop. "Every recording, intercepted message, and video feed, uploaded and logged." Evelyn nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "Now it's up to them to finish what we started." At the town square, Sheriff Colt Branson addressed the townsfolk who had gathered. His voice carried authority but also deep gratitude. "Brookhaven stood together in the face of fear, and we prevailed," Colt said. "Thanks to every one of you who refused to back down, we've sent a message that this town isn't for the taking." The crowd erupted in applause, their spirits lifted by the sheriff's words. Evelyn stood at the back of the group, quietly observing. Nora joined her, arms crossed and a wry smile on her face. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Nora said. Evelyn allowed a small smile. "It does. But the work isn't done. We've won the battle, but we need to make sure the Syndicate can't recover." That afternoon, Evelyn met with the Federal Task Force commander, Agent Russell Crane. A no-nonsense man with a stern demeanor, Crane wasted no time reviewing the case. "Your evidence was thorough," Crane said, flipping through a thick file. "It gave us everything we needed to classify the Iron Fang Syndicate as a domestic terrorist organization. Victor Steele and his lieutenants will face federal charges, RICO violations, weapons trafficking, terrorism. They'll be locked away for life." Evelyn leaned forward. "And their network? What about their operations in other towns?" "We're dismantling it as we speak," Crane assured her. "The arrests here sent shockwaves through their organization. We've already executed raids in 3 other states. They're done, Ms. Green." The victory felt tangible, but Evelyn couldn't shake the lingering weight of responsibility. As the federal agents worked, she turned her attention to the townsfolk. At the diner, she met with small business owners who had been targeted by the Syndicate. She listened to their stories, shared their grief, and reassured them that the worst was over. At the police station, she thanked the deputies who had held the line during the attacks, their bravery a key factor in the town's survival. And at her flower shop, she hosted a gathering for her team, Sarah, Nora, Mike, and a few trusted allies. Together, They reflected on the long fight and the friendships forged in the fire. By evening, news of Brookhaven's triumph had spread beyond the town. Media outlets covered the story of a small community that stood against a violent syndicate and won. Journalists praised the courage of the townsfolk and highlighted the pivotal role played by Evelyn Green and her team. Evelyn, however, avoided the limelight. She knew the fight wasn't about glory but about protecting the people and the place she loved. The following day, federal agents escorted Victor Steele into court for his initial hearing. Cameras flashed as he was led inside, his trademark arrogance replaced by a hollow, defiant glare. Sarah watched the coverage on TV, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "He's finally facing justice," she said. Evelyn joined her, her eyes fixed on the screen. "This is just the beginning. The trial will be long, and he'll fight it every step of the way. But the evidence is overwhelming. He won't walk away from this." In the weeks that followed, Brookhaven began to rebuild. Businesses repaired their storefronts, families returned to their routines, and the fear that had gripped the town slowly faded. Evelyn worked tirelessly, helping wherever she could. She coordinated with Colt to establish new community watch programs, ensuring that the town would never be caught off guard again. Nora took on a leadership role, organizing town meetings and rallying volunteers for restoration projects. "If we're going to rebuild," she said, "we're going to do it together." Mike, ever the optimist, used his truck to deliver supplies and equipment to those in need. "This town gave me a lot," he said. "It's time I gave back." One evening, Evelyn received a letter from Agent Crane. It detailed the success of the federal operations against the syndicate and included a personal note. "Ms. Green, your actions not only saved Brookhaven but also exposed a criminal network operating across multiple states. Your courage and determination are a reminder that even the most entrenched threats can be dismantled with the right people and the right plan. Thank you for everything." Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in her desk. The fight had been long and hard, but the results were undeniable. As the months passed, Brookhaven returned to its peaceful rhythm. The flower shop buzzed with customers once more, its shelves filled with vibrant blooms. Evelyn worked alongside Sarah, their bond stronger than ever after everything they'd endured. One afternoon, as Evelyn prepared a bouquet for a customer, George Henderson entered the shop. The retired military officer, ever composed, offered a small nod of approval. "You did well, Evelyn," George said. "You proved that strength isn't about muscle or numbers. It's about heart and resolve." Evelyn smiled. "I learned from the best." George chuckled. "Maybe so. But you took it further than I ever could have." In the final scene, Evelyn stood on the shop's porch, watching the sunset over Brookhaven. The town was quiet, peaceful, and safe once more. Sarah joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "What's next?" Sarah asked. Evelyn took a sip, her eyes on the horizon. "We keep moving forward. We protect what we've built, and we make sure nothing like this ever happens again." As the sun dipped below the trees, casting the town in a warm glow, Evelyn felt a sense of fulfillment. Brookhaven wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and community, and she would do whatever it took to keep it that way.